role come about to you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, first off, yes, it's been such an incredibly warm welcome in the Resident Evil family. I love these shirts, by the way. I'm here for the shirts. And yeah, I had the audition kind of come to me, and it was all code-named as the video games often are. But I couldn't tell exactly who this character was and what the game was, which is pretty iconic and just pretty recognizable. So I sent in a tape originally, because they were just released at that point, and I just knew what I wanted to do with this thing. I had a lot of supportive people around me, and got the call back. I went to meet the directors and the producing team for Capcom, and we just kind of hit it off. We all had a really shared vision for what Jill was going to look like in this kind of iteration of her character, because she's so known, from the 90s and the 2000s, there's so many versions of her that I've already seen, and this was really kind of the first time we were going to see her in this resolution, this quality, this narrative-focused kind of story. So it's a reimagining in many ways, and so we were trying to decide what of the nostalgia we want to bring in, and what of her character are we going to forge forward. And obviously, I'm going to bring myself to any role that I do. You understand that. And I just had the time of my life getting to it.
Well, it's interesting you brought up the fact that there have been many, iterations and many voices to the character. A lot of people are saying your version is the favorite version. I mean, I don't know what you guys think. Another million, yeah. But when you were sort of looking at the role overall, how did you decide which pieces, even before you met with the directors, which pieces you were going to pull from previous iterations and bring in, and then what you wanted to sort of create new yourself?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think I rely, same, agree, do it. Yeah.
There's a train going by. That's what happens when you're in a theme park. I love it.
Beautiful train, I love it. So I have to give a lot of credit to the writers of this iteration, because it was more narrative heavy in some ways. So I really looked at what was on the page, and a lot of her really lived on the page already, which was really nice. So basically, you're looking at the core parts of who Jill Valentine is. She's a badass, she's a police officer, she's an elite STARS officer. So bringing all of those aspects in and bringing it to a modern understanding of what that means to be a female cop, to be thrown into a situation and a scenario that's less than ideal. And I was mostly curious about how characters overcome the obstacles that they're given really reveals to you who they are. And so just the fact that she continues to get back up, she continues to have a little bit of wit, a little bit of humor, and I really valued those things. So I looked back at some of the pieces, some of the iterations, and there's been some really wonderful, cheesy, nostalgic versions in the past that we all love. And in this version, I knew we were going for more gritty, a little more cinematic, a little bit more like a movie. So it was about bringing a lot of realism in many ways to how would I realistically react to this crazy, circumstance.
Well, and I had to think that it would help a lot as a voice actor that you also got to do the physical motion capture.
Yes. Anytime I get to do performance capture or motion capture, it's always 10 times better because we get to bring all the physicality, and the facial capture performance of the character's face matches our vocal performance even more, because we get to do all of it from the ground up. So anytime you get to embody something, you're always going to need just that extra leg up in bringing something fully to life.
What was probably, obviously very physical, role. What was probably the hardest piece of the game to physically do? Does one part stand out?
There's an incredible amount of amazing physical feats that Jill goes through. She rolls off buildings, and she goes down cars, and it's all broken up into little pieces on the mocap stage. And I did all these awesome rolls and this different thing, and got thrown around. It was super fun. There was a stunt double for some of the wire work that can't be done with the facial capture rigs that we wear. But hilariously, the most difficult part happened in a very anticlimactic scene as far as what Jill actually does. And for those that have played the game, no spoilers, but when Brad and Jill interact at the very beginning of the game, he pushes her against, just away from the door, and she falls. That fall wasn't actually totally intended to be a full fall, and I just bit the dust and got the most amazing bruise that took out like half of my leg because I ended up hitting the wooden bar that was the placeholder for where like the bar was in the scene. And then she gets back up and like, stabs the zombie and rolls out. It was super cool, and I finished it, felt awesome, and I was like, oh my gosh, my leg is going to be purple, and it was. So that was the most difficult scene. It doesn't really show that pain through the game, because she just looks awesome, which is great. But the actor who played Brad, Darren O'Hare, and I have a good laugh. And he hates that I tell that story, because he feels so responsible for bruising Jill Valentine.
Well, sometimes I think it's like you said, like the not necessarily the most complicated or the most difficult, stuff. It's just kind of like a casualty of the work environment.
It's always like the most repetitive things too. You're always sore after those. So if you have any scenes that just take forever because they're like a complicated scene with a whole bunch of aspects, you end up doing them over and over. There's this one scene near the end when she's talking to Nikolai and Nemesis, and it's a whole crazy fiasco, and she runs up these stairs, and because it's part of this like huge environment, and she crashes down and all this crazy stuff, running up the stairs like 20 times, it's a thing. By the end of the workday, you're like, well, I worked out for 8 hours. That was lovely.
And you're wearing the suit, right?
Correct.
Okay.
We're a fully Velcro mocap suit with a headgear.
For people who don't know, give a full description,
Yes, so a motion capture suit is basically like a Velcro wetsuit with a bunch of little Velcro balls that go all over it that are shiny. And if you take a picture of them with flash, they all light up, which is fascinating, and it never gets old. No matter how many times you get on set, you get your flash cell phone out and you make all the walls light up because it's really fun. So it's basically like wearing a wetsuit, and then we have all this crazy gear because we have like a belt that has batteries that runs the facial capture helmet that goes on our head and has a camera out in front of our face to capture all of our facial movements. And we have the dots on our face, and the animators can basically match our face up with character models, which is why when you watch the game and the cinematics, you go, wow, it somehow looks like you, even though they have a different model for what they want the character to look like. But my family always jokes, she looks just like you, and she doesn't, but you watch it, it's my face, the movements that come in there.
So what was your first impression when you saw the first iteration of the finished product?
I was in a ADR session in the booth, and it was my first time getting to see her. And it wasn't even the fully finished product, but it was right close to the end before they did the final polish. And I was like, okay, all right, that's it. That's what's showing up. And I was just excited. It's so strange to kind of see it, because you see it through all of development. When we're actually on the motion capture stage, they have a rendered version of the character, so you can control the model on the stage live, which is very cool, but it doesn't have the final face and some of those aspects and those things. So yeah, it was very exciting. And then literally just like everyone else, when the first trailer dropped is really when I got the first look at the real finished product and then the demo. And so I got to be just as excited as all of the fans. I wasn't allowed to say anything, even when some of the stuff was dropping. I wasn't supposed to announce my involvement until the day the game dropped. So it was really fun to have so many people messaging me, being like, is that you? I don't know.
I'm not sure. And you guys actually did work here and in Japan, right?
We did, yeah. I spent over probably a month in total in Tokyo at a mocap stage out there, which is super cool and has quickly become one of my favorite places. If anyone has the chance to go to Japan, the answer is yes. Do it. It's amazing. And I'm also a sushi lover, which helps.
Yeah, that does, right? That's great. What would you say, because you have a background, American Horror Story, other projects that you've been not in the game world on. So what is the biggest difference between tackling a role for traditional film or television versus a role in a game?
I love this question because it's so dependent on what aspect you're talking about. If you talk about the actual filmmaking process, when you're on film or television, it operates so differently in some ways and so similarly in other ways, because on the mocap stage we still have camera work, we still have angles, but in many ways it's kind of like this perfect marriage between theater and film work, because we're doing full scenes all the way through And the wide shot, the close-up, and the mid shot are all getting captured in the same moment. Whereas when you're doing film or TV, like, you have to do the scene over and over again for these different camera angles. Whereas on the mocap stage, it happens all at the same time. So you just end up doing the scene over and over again until the director and the team feels like they have every moment that they want. And in many ways, that's like theater. You end up doing like full scenes, and film gets chopped up a lot, unless it's like some crazy like action sequence that on the mocap stage will get chopped up. Because when you're dealing with Nemesis, who's like 8.5, 9 feet tall, your eye lines change until the actors get put in different positions, and it's very unique. So that in itself, like the actual process of filming, has some major differences. And for anyone that's not used to like green screen work or like basically acting with nothing there, the mocap stage is the ultimate place for imagination, because we basically have like a few wood blocks and nothing else.
Right.
So they're showing us the environments on iPads, just being like, this is where you are, and it's this crazy like warehouse or landscape.
But meanwhile, it looks like the stage.
Meanwhile, there's a carpeted rug floor. Make sure you T-pose before we start. So that's kind of how that goes. Whereas when you're on a film set on location, like you'll have more to work with. So mocap, there's always asking permission to, like, hey, can I sit on the bed? No, the material, like, we don't want to have to animate the material. Whereas in film, you just might do it. That happened in like the very first scene where she's on the phone with Brad. Originally, they had me like sit down on the bed to talk to him for a minute, and then they decided, no, nix it. Like, we don't want to have to animate the actual like material on the bed. So it's so technical in some ways, and you don't always face that in film and TV stuff.
That's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Like every little thing is affected, and every touch, every
Also,
nuance.
at the end of every scene, if you're the playable character, you have to end back in the playable character's standing position. So you have to find a way to naturally go from the end of any cinematic scene to like, bye! And you have to like hit the same position, because then the player takes over control. So that helps them make that seamless transition from cinematic, which is motion captured, and then when the player has control. Because if the player has control, we didn't do it on the mocap stage.
Interesting. Yeah. What about the dialogue? Is there any room for any improvisation or any suggestion of things?
Totally. Yes, there is. There's definitely opportunities because there's so much dialogue. You have an incredible amount of dialogue when the player has control, and so throughout the game, she interacts with her environment. Definitely burning these clothes and stuff like that happen as she goes throughout the game. And so those pieces all happen in a voiceover booth. So those sometimes have some flexibility and also require a lot of like flexibility on the artist's part, because at that point, we don't necessarily always know where those dialogue pieces are going to go in the context of the game. So there's lots of like communication happening with the game developers, Japanese team, going like, what is she actually reacting to? She's dying by fire here. Why? Like, at what point is she interacting with fire? When does that happen? Is it pre this event, post that event? Which helps me try to figure out where the character is in her arc of kind of her final escape.
That is so interesting. I love that. Well, one of the cool things that I think that you started doing is, you stream on Twitch Lab, but you actually play the character, which is so cool. Have any of you guys ever have streamed with her?
Hell yeah!
Yeah!
Awesome! Yeah, so I've been streaming live on Twitch, playing through the games, because it's fun, one. And two, I've loved picking on other actors to kind of like highlight their experience and their times in the games as well. And in some ways, that's also like a difference between film and TV. I'm almost on this small campaign to just like elevate some of the other artists that are behind our most beloved characters in games, because we're just now, in some ways, in the game industry, coming to this like greater appreciation and respect for the narrative and the voice work, and like looking up the people behind them. We have, the trailblazers like Troy Baker and Nolan North, and these actors that are super well known in all of these games, and they've really, in many ways, like brought some attention to like, oh wow, like we really care about the performers behind these roles, because they're full-on actors that are bringing these characters to life. And so I love getting to play and like talk to the community and talk about the work and highlight my fellow artists, because I'm just so proud of some of the incredible talent that I've been so blessed to work with.
I love that you're shining a spotlight on, those that may not be known yet. Because you're right, there's so many people who go into a project like Resident Evil, like just
Totally.
in every layer.
The animators, there's just so many departments on any project. But often in film, you have the face, or you'll have the whole PR campaigns and whatnot. And the games don't always rely on the name talent to be sold. Like, you don't play Resident Evil necessarily because I was in it. You're playing Resident Evil because you love Resident Evil, but then you come to know the people that helped bring it to life, and then you create a relationship and you're excited because we're all nerding out together. Like, I was just as stoked as anyone when I got the call that I would get to meet Jill Valentine.
Yeah. Okay, what was that moment like? That's a good question. And then you guys get ready, because I'm gonna ask if anybody has something to ask Nicole. But what was that moment like when you got the call? Yes, you, after all these auditions.
Okay, so
you are Jill.
Admittedly, the final callback was a mix and match, so that means we were doing chemistry reads with other actors that were being auditioned for some of the other roles, like Carlos, like Nikolai. So that was actually where I met Jeff Shine, who plays Carlos, and Neil Newman, who plays Nikolai, and did all the motion capture for Nemesis. And we were doing scenes and reading with different people, and there was 2 other women there that were there for Jill at this callback series, and my lovely director just wasn't very subtle. I kept being the only Jill getting called in over and over to read with all these different people, to the point that the waiting room was getting to the point where I was like, oh, sitting back down, it probably doesn't mean anything, guys. And they're just sitting there, and so at that point I was clued in. I was like, either they're wanting to save the person that they've chosen and not wear them out and just use me, or they're leading my direction. So at that point I was feeling pretty confident, but we never we never assume. And then I got the call from my agent, and I was just like, yes! It came 2 days later, and I was like, oh. That 2 days though, try to let it go and not think about it.
That's the worst. Yeah. Well, it was the perfect casting. You're great in the role.
Thank you so much.
All right, who has a question out here? Yes, hell yes. Go ahead.
Hi, Nicole. My name is Marco. I came all the way from Los Angeles.
Your name's Michael?
Marco or Michael?
Marco.
Marco, talk really loud.
Marco. M-A-R-K-O.
Marco.
You did 2 amazing cameos for me. You sang Warren Mayberry.
You're the Church's band.
Yes, I am.
I know exactly who you are, Marco.
Love the performance. The cameos were amazing. You remind me of Warren Mayberry so much. I don't know why, you just do. You have so many things in common. For once, you both adopted cats this year. I mean, thanks to COVID-19, what else is there to do than adopt a pet?
Yo, when COVID hits, you get a kitten.
Exactly. I just want you to know, Jill has been a part of my life since the 90s. She's the reason why I moved to the United States, why I can speak English. You told an amazing performance. I was so worried who was going to get the part. I wanted it to be Ashley Burch so much, but after I saw your performance, I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is going to be the next Ashley Burch. I loved every second of it. You brought so much emotion into the character.
Oh, I so appreciate that. Ashley's so incredibly talented, so she's such a wonderful voice actress as well, and has been an inspiration in many ways with Aloy and some of her other Life is Strange characters. So I appreciate that I still brought everything that you were hoping for.
Exactly. Even more than that, this version, your version of Jill is so emotional. She's so feminine. She's a survivor. She's so determined. My favorite thing about her is that she's a badass, but at the same time, she's a little bit of damsel in distress. It's so nice when you're a male gamer and you get the chance to play a Scarlet and save her.
Right.
Some of the guys get kicks. I get my kicks because I'm a gentleman. And I'm really thrilled, and the game was very good. It was a little bit short, but it was good.
Thank you.
And you really blew me away.
Oh, I so appreciate that.
Did you play the game the first day it came out?
Oh, I 100%ed it on both PS4, PC. I bought the collector's edition, but sadly my collector's edition is in Europe. I won't be going home for a long time. I caught my last train to get here. There aren't going to be any more green cards, so
Yeah.
I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going home. This is my first time in Texas. I want to welcome you back. I know you're a Texan, bro.
Hey, welcome to Texas.
Beautiful.
Thanks for
San
coming.
Antonio, the people in here are so nice.
Isn't it beautiful? It's so lovely, the river walk and all of that.
Exactly. I've been there yesterday, sat at a bar, and the bartender didn't want to charge me for drinks. It's amazing.
Yeah, the people here are incredibly, incredibly nice. Texas is where my heart is, so.
Yeah, you're from Dallas, right?
I'm from Dallas,
Yes.
originally, a little town called Rockwall. It's not so little anymore, just east of Dallas. And born and raised.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you, and thanks for coming today.
Are we going to be able to take photos maybe?
I'm not sure what the process is, but we'll find out, and I'll let you know.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nicole.
And she's here all weekend, too.
Yeah.
You'll always be my Jill Valentine.
Hey, thank you so much, Margo. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you,
Thanks
Margo.
for being here.
Oh, always.
Does anyone else have a question? All right, stand on up. Shout it out.
Alright, so since we already know you finished RE2 already on your live stream with Nick and Stephanie,
Yep.
who's more scarier, Nemesis or Mr. X?
This is such a good question.
That is a
And
good
actually,
question.
I still have a little bit of Claire's campaign left to do. And Stephanie and I, we're gonna go live again, I think next Wednesday, to try and continue that RE2 process. So I haven't fully finished RE2, but I did finish Leon's campaign. And, all right, so admittedly, in real life, I might feel differently. I would say probably Nemesis is more terrifying. But because I got to actually play through the game, because I didn't know what was going to happen at every twist and turn of RE2, because I didn't make that game, but I did make RE3, I actually find the stalker nature of Mr. X in RE2 to be incredibly terrifying. Now, I still jump every time Nemesis pops out or shows up, but I always when Nemesis shows up, you know, all right, we're running or we're battling. Mr. X, you just never know. He could just be outside your safe room, which is totally uncool, which means I just spend more time hanging out in the safe rooms, which, you know, no shame to those people whose favorite part of the horror video games is the safe room.
Do you agree with her assessment?
Oh, yeah. There's a level more scary.
Nemesis is pretty crazy, but I think, yeah, because you were kind of in it with,
To be
you
fair,
know.
whenever I see Nemesis 2, I just think of Neil Newbon, who did all of his motion capture, and just what an amazing, hilarious, string-bean dork that he is. He's incredible, and I adore him. And also, he plays all of Bad Guys Forever, and is like a brother to me. So, I just imagine him stomping around whenever Nemesis shows up, and I just can't keep a straight face. So, that probably influences it a little bit, too, because I always had to be, so serious and intense, and Neil was just showing up, pretending to be this thing that's double his size. So it's just, inherently funny if you mute all of the audio and you don't have the epicness of a fully developed product. It's pretty hilarious. So I also have that tainting my actual, horror experience.
So everybody here loves, obviously Resident Evil, loves Jill. What do you geek out about? Other than, Twitch and streaming at times, what do you do in your free time? What are you passionate about? What is your, jam?
Love that. Well, I have lots of things. I'm very curious by nature, so ask me on any given day and it'll change, but I'm a total shutterbug. I love to take photos, I love photography, I'm a nerd for cameras, and I'm also just such an artist at heart, so I'm going to continue to produce and direct eventually as well as some of my own projects. And I'm just a film nerd, so I love movies and I love games and our whole entertainment industry is kind of my world. And then as far as things that I geek out on, I'm a fantasy nerd for sure. So getting to do Lord of the Rings was really cool and high up there on my list. And some of that fantasy-esque genres and world I just adore and love. So yeah, I nerd about that, and then I'm a total Sherlock nerd.
Oh,
Yeah,
I love Sherlock.
Freaking love Sherlock. Benedict Cumberbatch, Andrew Scott, the BBC Sherlock. Ooh, I'm here for it.
Okay, so here's a good question. There's the eternal debate about what differentiates and delineates fantasy and science fiction.
Such a good question.
It's such a good question. What's your perspective?
I've been in writing classes recently, and I had a professor tell me this, and I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I fully agree that this is the permanent, definitive answer, but he said the difference is in sci-fi.
Just ignore that. It's just a big top circus happening somewhere.
I'm here for the service now. In sci-fi, technology is always what's going to rescue you, and in fantasy, magic will always rescue you.
Oh, that's good.
Like, primarily the difference is you can't have necessarily with technology and magic, so sci-fi is always going to be founded in the sense of something that could potentially be possible, and fantasy is going to be different. It doesn't matter whether or not it's possible, it's magic.
Right.
So I thought that was a pretty good delineation. And then as far as like actual, we can totally nerd out. If you get into like the narrative structure of fantasy stories versus sci-fi, fantasy often follows a very specific narrative structure. You'll see a pretty common hero's journey, which will show up in almost any movie, but fantasy specifically relies really heavily on that. And sci-fi can sometimes go for a slightly different structure depending on how the story unfolds. So anyway, that's me getting into like.
I do like that. I do like the technology versus magic. That's a good delineation. Yeah, so we can roll with that. So guys, unfortunately we're out of time. These little panels go quickly, but the good news is Nicole is here all weekend. We're talking about different stuff every time she's on stage.
Because this